guys, I'm Poplin with Boris FX, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use the Sapphire tools to create some really nice beauty work isolated with Mocha masks now found inside your Sapphire toolkit. Sapphire and Mocha, two great tastes that taste great together like chocolate and peanut butter. I'm going to show you how to create an effect that looks like this. We're going to use S Beauty, S Blur, and S Glint. So let's get started. I'm going to select my layer, and then in my effect library I'm going to navigate to our Sapphire tools. In this case I'm going to select the Sapphire Blur and Sharpen tools, S Beauty. Inside of S Beauty there's a Mocha drop down. Right above the Mocha drop down is this button that says Edit Mocha. Sapphire will start Mocha and it will actually read our footage from the timeline. Now the reason I actually need to use Mocha for this shot is because this is a blonde lady with pale skin, so if I do a key on her face, I'm going to key her hair. What I want to do instead is track her face and her body to isolate the effect. Now I will select my X-spline and I will draw a shape around her face. I draw a shape around her face because Mocha is a planar tracker. So what does that mean? Planar tracking means we track a pattern of pixels as they move relative to one another through the scene, and that's a mouthful. All you really need to know is that we track a texture that moves in one direction. You want to think of objects in terms of low poly models. We get away with tracking her face as one plane because she's mostly facing us, and most of the pixels move similarly. For more complex roto or precise tracks, you may want to track one plane at a time. For garbage mats to isolate beauty, this is fine. I'm going to use my Add to X-spline tool to cut her eyes out of my shape. And I'm going to use the Add X-spline tool to cut the bottom of her nose out as well, and her mouth. Now why am I doing that? I'm doing that because I want to hold it out of the mat of the shape. I'm going to call this Face Roto. And you notice I used X-splines for this. Now why did I use X-splines? Here's why. Because I can just relax for a curve. And if I select all of these points, I can relax and make these curved automatically. That's instead of having to worry about Beziers, where I have to worry about two handlebars. I'm also going to draw a shape around her skin here. I'm going to call this neck and chest. I'm going to take neck and chest and I'm going to drag it under Face Roto. That's because while we're tracking this, we don't want to hold this shape out of this shape. Mocha treats everything at the top of the layer pile as closest to the camera, and everything further from the camera needs to go at the bottom of the layer pile. This is because Mocha will automatically hold out all of your foreground shapes from your background shapes as long as you, as the user, define what those foreground and background shapes are. Because this is rotoscoping, we're not going to track perspective, but here are the parameters that we track. Translation's pretty obvious, alright. Scale's really obvious, alright, and then rotation is also obvious, but shear and perspective mess people up, so here's shear versus perspective. Shear is just a shift in X and Y, while perspective is the addition of Z space to that movement. If your object is not moving in shear or perspective, then you want to leave those off. But her face is moving in shear and perspective. However, because this is rotoscoping, I'm going to leave perspective off. If I were doing a track, I would leave perspective on. By default, our input channel is left at luminance. I'm going to just track this while I talk. In layer controls, think of these gears as your action item in Mocha. When these gears are on, it means these layers are being tracked. Because both of these gears are going to be on for both these layers as I track, it will track both her face and her neck patch that I'm tracking as well. So what are we tracking? The input channel. Luminance means our R, G, and B channels. Auto tracking means we look at R, G, or B and Mocha decides. By default, you want to leave it on luminance. Minimum percent of pixels used means we're tracking 30% of the pixels inside of this shape. And we can crank this value up if our object is slipping, but I actually think our track is hanging on really nicely. All we need to adjust though is the edges of the shape, because you can see it's tracking her face really well. We're just going to have to adjust the roto. Smoothing level applies an all-over blur to your image, and if you don't have a crazy amount of grain, just go ahead and leave it off. I've actually never had to use it, and I've been using Mocha for 8 years. We have 3 different motion settings: large motion, small motion, and manual track. And what do they mean? Large motion is your basic movement you're ever going to have to track: people walking, balls bouncing, birds flying, etc. Small motion is what we call sub-pixel motion. So for instance, your camera's on a tripod and the wind is blowing past, creating little half-pixel variations in your image. And manual track is exactly what it sounds like. It allows you to manually move the track by hand. So by default, the surface is a child of the track and the shape is the child of the track. The track is actually a nebulous piece of math that exists inside Mocha's brain. And the shape follows what it's doing, not the other way around. The shape is where the track is looking, but it also follows the track. And I know that gets confusing, but if you can grasp that concept, you're going to track in Mocha extremely well. When I say the surface tool, what do I mean? The surface tool is what translates the track into a language that we can understand. So it goes from nebulous math data inside Mocha's brain out to an output that we can understand. The surface tool is either a corner pin or a transform. The transform is the cross hair in the middle of the surface tool, and the corner pin are all 4 corners of your surface tool. You can move the surface tool to any location and it will still follow the track. It will not change what the track is doing. The exception is inside of manual track, where when you use manual track, you can adjust the surface tool and it will adjust what the track is doing. You use this to get past occlusions, and we will cover that in another demo. If you increase your angle inside of Mocha, what this will do is this will widen the search area we look when an object is rotating. And zoom is the same thing. It increases your search area. Obviously you're going to take a processing hit when that happens, but it's better to take the processing hit and then let Mocha do the work for you than have to hand correct everything over time. It's just faster. So you can see I'm letting Mocha do the bulk of the animation for me. Once this track is complete, I'm going to adjust the mask on her face so that it looks less like she's wearing somebody else's skin and more like she's wearing a kabuki mask. You can see I have one keyframe, alright, at the beginning. But what I need to do is I need to find the arcs of the animations. So here is a good place to correct this roto shape. Let's pull this to the side of her face and follow it along her jaw. And then adjust this to the side of her face. So now Mocha will tween between that correction I just made. And if I feel like I need to adjust it again, I can adjust it just like this. So again, we look for the arcs of the animation, so I feel like this is the most changed. What I mean by the arcs of the animation is if you are animating a bouncing ball, you want to animate on the squash and the stretch, and then let Mocha do the tweening for you. It's a lot easier to rotoscope with a Wacom tablet than it is a mouse. However, roto with whatever tools make you comfortable. Rotoscoping with a mouse is a little bit like rotoscoping with a brick, but use the tools you have available to you. Alright, so that's the area we're going to apply our Beauty Studio to. And then I'm going to adjust the shape on her body as well. So really quickly, I have done some quick and dirty roto. If we use the hand tool, we can reposition our frame. If we use the zoom tool, we can zoom in and out as needed. So I'm going to turn my mats off. I'm going to adjust my surface tool, and I'm going to show you what I mean by saying the surface tool follows the track. So here's our surface tool, and you can see it's glued to her forehead. That's what the track is doing, and you can see that even though we've animated the shape is separate from the track. So here's our tracking data, and here's our mask that we're using. What Mocha does is Mocha looks at the texture inside of this mask over time and how that texture is changing, and that texture change is how we get our track right here. The track jumps ahead and then pulls the shape and the surface tool to it, not the other way around. We don't actually have to have a track to do roto inside of Mocha, but it makes our life a lot easier, and that's how we cut our keyframes down. In Mocha, you cut your keyframes down to about 1/3 of what you would normally use, cutting your roto time in half. We're going to save this and we're going to close it, and now we're going to apply our effect. So let's check our Luma range to apply our beauty effect, and let's increase our range softness, and let's increase our blur amount. Let's increase this to like 75 so you can really see what we're doing. And let's actually blur our Mocha mask a bit as well. If we check our Show Mocha Only box, we can see how our effect is being isolated. So here's our before, and here's our after. And you can see we're not blurring all her hair with the Luma key we used for Mocha. Let's say that I still don't like these lines here in her face though, and under her eyes, and I want to do a more serious blur on top of that. We'll select our layer, we go to Effect, let's go to Sapphire Blur and Sharpen, and select S Blur. Let's hit Edit Mocha. Let's track the sides for a mount using my X-Spline and Add to X-Spline. And let's track under her eyes with the same technique because these are both on the same plane. Let's select our picker tool and relax our X-Spline so that we get a nice curved area. Let's call this mouth lines, and let's call this under eye. And if these thumbnails ever bother you when you are adjusting your shapes, you can turn them off here. Let's track both of these through the shot. I'm going to use my Activate Quick Stabilize mode so that I keep these in the center of my screen the whole time. This is a really nice way to rotoscope because it'll lock your shapes into one place so you can see where they're changing over time. And it'll allow you to adjust your masks. So I can actually adjust my masks on the fly while I'm tracking, just like this, and keep tracking. And Mocha's planar tracker, which is essentially a texture tracker, is so sensitive that it even captures the nice wiggle that happens when she closes her eyes. Now again, we're going to move this shape in on the fly and keep tracking. Alright, so I can quickly adjust my roto. Alright, so I'm pretty happy with it. We're going to save it and close it. Now it's applied my blur to just these locations. I'm going to blur this maybe 15. I'm going to go into my Mocha. I'm going to blur my masks inside of Mocha to get rid of my hard edges. So here's 35. So we've completely gotten rid of the lines. So really quickly, we've added a beauty effect to this shot without having to do tedious hand masking. I can even add this to lighting effects, so I can go into Effect, Sapphire Lighting. Let's do an S glint. And I actually don't want to glint off the background, I only want to glint off this side of the screen. So let's hit Edit Mocha. Let's do a quick and dirty roto mask, just like this. Hit Save and Close. And now it isolates glint to this area of my screen. But you'll notice there's no hard line. So let's duplicate this. After. So as you can see, Mocha inside of Sapphire really increases your toolbox to create powerful visual effects extremely quickly. We want to help you make cool work, and we want to get you home on time. I can even save any of my presets just by clicking Save Preset inside of my S effect and navigating to where I want to save it. If you have any questions, I am Mary Poplin, and you can find out more on www.borisfx.com.